Welcome everybody. I'm Antoinette Weibel and I'm Professor for Human Resource Management and Organization at the University of St. Gallen. And for the past 25 years, I have been doing research on several HR practices, but also on performance management. And what I would like to do in the next 30 minutes is to give you a brief overview of the academic research on the effectiveness of performance management. And I want to share my conclusions of what works and what, in my opinion, based on evidence, definitely does not work. But before we go into this topic, I just want to define performance management. So performance management is a systematic process and is a set of interdependent and complementary practices by which an organization engages its employees in improving effectiveness and achieving its goals. Well, there are usually three key objectives of performance management, which are first, aligning employees with organizational strategy, second, develop people and enhancing performance and motivation, and third, optimize compensation. Now, as you can see on the slide, performance management consists of 5 core components, and the main components that I will focus on in this presentation are goal setting, so this is about establishing individual objectives that align with organizational goals, feedback, providing communication to guide and support employees, appraisal, evaluating employees through formal assessments, 4, learning and development. So this is identifying areas for improvement and offering opportunities for professional growth and skill enhancement, and finally, pay and reward, which is all about acknowledging performance to motivate and retain employees. Now, for each of these 5 components, I will now review the evidence found in research. As you can see on this slide, I have selected the most problematic issues to keep it short and sharp. If you're interested in a more comprehensive assessment, please go to our website. Now let's look at this a little bit more in detail. And we will start with the first aspect, always starting off this whole process. This is goal setting. In a nutshell, good goals are highly effective. They align and they motivate. But you will also hear me explain why I believe less smart but more progress and learning-oriented goals are better. And here is why. Well, first of all, note, smart is never what science invented. For us, specific and right ambition level is enough. And actually, the additional MRT in the formula might have created some of the problems. So when Lockett tested the effect of specific and ambitious goals in the 70s, he did it with lumberjacks. He found out they would load more trees on a truck if they were given specific and challenging goals rather than do your best goals. And ever since, we have mounting evidence just how well these goals for simple and plannable tasks work. But then there are always 2 main risks associated with these type of goals. And these risks loom heavier for smart work. First, smart goals work because they create a focus, they give us concentration, but this focus also can easily lead us astray because it gives us a tunnel vision and it helps us, or it doesn't help us, but it undermines our oversight. Maybe you know the exercise where students need to count how often players are passing a ball, but when they count, they tend to oversee a gorilla walking through the playfield. And if you've watched such videos, you might have seen it, but people who are seeing it the first time, 50% of them miss the gorilla. Now the point is, you cannot mend that because exactly that is the that is the idea about these specific goals. You always want to create focus. So of course you can give people more goals, but if you give people more goals, then they will simply opt either for the easy goals or those goals which can easily be reached. So they will still not have this oversight. And they will, of course, then also neglect the other goals, which we call the multiple task effect. I give you a very simple example of this multiple task effect. In the state of New York, they once decided that hospitals should get resources depending on their mortality rate. And it happened what has to happen. They put the focus on mortality rate and didn't look at anything else. And so what they did is that if ever somebody with a severe illness wanted to check into the hospital, they had to go to a university hospital because they couldn't say no. So this is staying with us. This is a large problem for more complex work. Second, smart goals also work because they create will, they create a challenge. But such things, such will, can also overpower people. It can evoke gambling behavior, which is especially the case if such overambitious goals meet with overconfident individuals. And here it was Max Besemann from Harvard University who looked at the last banking crisis and showed how this was linked to these gambling behaviors, because their overambitious goals was meeting on Masters of the Universe. And we all know what happened afterwards. But it can do more than that if these goals are too ambitious. Because we have found out now with various studies that this can fuel unethical behavior. Because on the one hand, ambitious goals lead to emotional depletion, and this then often leads to unethical behavior. But it's also the case that ethical dilemmas cannot be solved if not new goals are added to the list. And you will not do that if you are given specific goals. And sometimes the measurability, this MRT, leads to calculation where no calculation should be done. Here an example, again from the business world. Very few of you might remember Ford Pinto, but Ford Pinto was a car model. Whenever another car touched it on the back, it would explode. And the very shocking thing was that engineers knew this. They knew this would happen whilst they were engineering the car. But what they then did, they did a cost-benefit analysis. So they were calculating how much they would save if they would prevent fatal accidents, and at this time they estimated it would be around $50 million, and compared it what would be the costs if they would design a new car body, which then was around 130 million US dollars. And you can already see who won, and that was then the case. This car model came out on the market without any other design. So most of you might think, well, but we have saved this. We had Google, and Google invented OKRs, and hence we don't have any of these problems. But hold on a second, it's not so easy, because if we disentangle OKRs a little bit, and here I've chosen something similar building on OKRs, which was published in Sloan Management Press, called FAST goals, we can easily see where some of the problems might still lie. So first, these goals are clearly more agile, so more frequent, and enable more ownership because they are discussed. And thereby they should create less misalignment than what we have heard so far. But these are at the same time over-ambitious, and I quote why, because they have to make use of peer pressure to perform, as well as prevent sandbagging, which will result in even more emotional depletion linked to burnout, fear and fight reactions, unfriendly behavior, and to what I have already told you, unethical behavior. And these are still specific, blindness attached, disruptive thinking and incubation with wild ideas thus included. So maybe that's not so good after all. But can research tell us anything about how to do better? And I would say yes. First, specific and ambitious learning goals are found to be just as motivating, but have virtually none of the side effects I just explained on smart performance goals. And then second, the way making progress is more important than attaining the goals. In fact, being able to create small wins every day is what likely makes most of the trick. And this can then be better with demonstrate quality improvement goals, so get better every day, or with just being attentive what tasks were reached, what small learnings were captured each and every day. And last but not least, by creating the right context, having focused, task-oriented time every day, not only meetings, and supporting employees with knowledge and resources so that they can really make progress. So let us turn to feedback now, which in the cycle was formal and scheduled, as otherwise so common sense. It would not happen. And in the traditional model, it also was performance feedback. So did you know that performance feedback, and I think we still use it amply today, never really worked? So what I have brought with here is a very old meta-analysis. Findings are still the same, but it's a nice meta-analysis because it shows something we don't show so often today any longer with that graph. It shows that when looking at all the studies, most studies had a zero effect. So zero, you don't want to have a zero in any meta-analysis. That's never a good message. And you can also see that about 1/3 of the studies even showed negative effects of performance feedback on performance. And you know what? This never changed very much ever since. So Kluger and Denisi, which are called a little bit like the feedback popes in my field, they looked, well, does it make a difference if we have more positive feedback, if we have constructive feedback, if we have timely feedback, sandwich technique, you name it. But overall, always some negative effects could be found. So what we say now, what we believe now is the problem is that it is the negative reinforcement, which is very strongly inbaked into this type of performance management. And the punishing part is most prominent if we force managers to rank their employees, not only to rate. So what we know about forced ranking is that it might work in the short run. So in the short run, it can indeed strengthen performance. But even in the short run, you have to see that it creates very likely misalignment because it leads to more acting, to looking good rather than acting good. So you have a lot of impression management. It also evokes a fight or flight reaction, which prevents learning in the feedback session where people sit like that, or it evokes reactance and stress at the same time. It also reduces often short-time performance right after the feedback, because then you can either sit back or you're angry. Both is not very conducive for performance. And that is, it provokes cyclical behavior. So performance will look more like that than a steady curve. It leaves employees feeling unfairly treated, and we will see in a minute, rightly so. And it leads to competition and envy, and thereby it turns often destructive. And I guess that's even the most important negative effect here. And that is particularly the case when we consider that such rankings lead to a specific self-selection. So guys like Gordon Gekko, that was Michael Douglas in Wall Street, if you remember, or I could also say men and competition seekers are attracted by that kind of system. And these are often the harder and unfair fighters. And the more of those you have in the system, the more ugly the competition gets. And that is why most companies try it out for some years and then abolish it again. Unfortunately, some 10 years later, they try it out again. But that's another question and nothing I can answer as a researcher why you would do that. Well, is it then that we just have to give more feedback, more transparency, work with feedback apps, and then we're fine? And as you can already imagine, I have to say it's also not so easy. And here, Ethan Bernstein, a researcher from Harvard, has done great work because he talks about the transparency paradox. He showed the more transparent your workplace becomes, the less transparent your employees will react. They start to do this acting again, a lot of impression management. They are unconcentrated, they feel stressed. So in an age of trackers, variables, online monitoring, workplace chat, always on devices, it turns out that sometimes just this little bit more privacy rather than transparency is driving performance. And that's important to bear in mind. And if we really talk about electronic performance monitoring and feedback, and also to some degree feedback apps, then we now have a brand new meta-analysis which shows it has negative effects on performance, and these negative effects are mostly created by the high psychological costs emanating out of that type of feedback. So that's probably also not the solution. But in the case of feedback, I think, and most companies have tried it out already, we're on a good way, as research shows that we should use here much more conversations, regular learning conversation, or as you call it in practice, meaningful conversations. And this is all about informal feedback which should be also focused on strengths, because if we focus on strengths, then we already have a network in our brain and it's easier to build on, and also it evokes positive emotions which are highly inspiring. It should always be person-specific, idiosyncratic. Everybody has his or her own ways to be excellent, to find her potential. So it's much more about coaching than telling. And it should be complemented by a feed-forward culture. How can we use our strengths in the future more effectively? What does it take for us to call upon our potential? And what does this mean also for team development? And I just added here another meta-analysis, which is by the former feedback Pope Abraham Kluger. And what I like about him, he decided for the last 10 years to be a listening researcher, and he shows that listening is much more effective than anything else you can do. So that's another thing to take on board. It's not always the dialogue, it can be also just sometimes listening properly, which is doing a lot of positive if you want to bring people in a learning and performance mode. Okay, let's go further. Let's have a look then at the next part of performance management. And here we're coming to performance appraisals, and I say it right out. Whilst this is the most important in the performance management cycle, it's also the most broken. And that is really problematic, as I'm going to tell you in a second. Because what we have found out is that the verdict, at present at least, is clear. Performance appraisal is not working as it should. And the only discussion left in the scientific community is whether we can ever make it work. But at present, state of the art, it's difficult, it's complicated. Because first, we have no reliable and valid method for obtaining judgments on performance. Read, neither ratings nor rankings work. Ratings formats hardly matter, so it doesn't matter which scale, small differences, but in the end, none of it is really producing a true number. Rated training does not really work, which means biases are still abundant. And adding more ratings, more sources, is also not producing truths. It's just adding different, not always reconcilable perspectives. Second, and I find that very important, performance is mostly a team sport. So by logic, we have to fail to attribute team efforts to individuals because synergy cannot be attributed. Third, performance is not distributed normally. And the company is also not a random sample of the population. And I would say hopefully so, because otherwise you haven't done a good job in management. Fourth, everybody hates the process, supervisors, employees, even HR managers. And fifth, and that's the real bummer, there is no correlation between individual performance appraisals and organizational performance. So this is really complicated. We have to fix it somehow, but I can tell you, individual performance appraisals right now, I would suggest do not do it. So we also, of course, attach consequences to that very thing, to performance appraisal. And there are two I want to discuss. The first one is talent management. Often we seek talent management based on what we just heard. And I have to tell you that might be even the more hairy problem. And that has mainly to do because when it comes to talent, we do not only want to look at performance, but we also want to look at potential. And this is, of course, what we, for instance, need for our beloved 9-box grid. But we even know less about potential and surely cannot measure it than we know about performance. And that was true in 2007, so as these guys on the one side say, but even in 2022, little has changed. So the concept of potential is really poorly conceptualized and grossly understudied. That is what Keisha and Collins here saying. And they even pronounce it the forgotten factor in research and do not think that consultants know it better. So I fear you really have to get rid of these 9-box thingies because you're not able to measure any of its dimensions, neither performance nor potential. Now let's go to the last important consequence, and this is the one where I had most research on, and that is rewards. Okay, stop. And I really mean you have to get rid of rating and rankings and other potential astrology because these really produce severe negative externalities. And that's a model which brings that home very nicely. It shows how our flawed performance and potential appraisals feed into societal inequality. Again, sorry, stop, again, new. And I really mean you have to get rid of these flawed ratings, rankings, and other potential astrology because these produce severe negative externalities on the societal model. This is a model which shows how small biases in our performance and potential appraisals feed into social inequality as an emergent construct on the societal level. And it turns out that organizations are real inequality producing machines. So if you go on the individual level, just think what happens if you select some out, single some out and say, well, these are the potentials. These are the persons who really need to be motivated and get some big fat rewards. Well, of course, over time, because they are chosen for talent management, will acquire more knowledge, skills, and abilities. And because they get this additional positive motivational kick, they also will develop higher self-efficacy, whilst you leave the others behind. And again, you don't know whether you left the right behind because the basis of all of that is flawed and biases play a big role. But that's not enough. That's just the single influence or the individual influence. If we go on the dyadic influence, think about leader and supervisors, then some of this will compound. Because here we have expectancies effect. And I just call out two, which I find quite interesting to know. And we call them Pygmalion and Golem effect. And that means whenever a supervisor has a very positive picture of an employee, for instance, because that person was chosen to be a talent, he or she will treat that person very differently, will challenge that person more, will encourage, support her more. And you can already see that this is provoking a self-fulfilling prophecy, because of course these are the things which make people able to also provide more. But there is also a dark and negative side of that, because that also means that you have a golem effect when it comes to those which haven't been singled out. You give them less chances, and hence they have even less chances to develop in the organization. And then you can also take the network level on top of everything else. And here it's about getting access to networks. And then I think it's clear that if you are singled out as a talent or if you are promoted more quickly, you are given easier access to better networks. So this will grow your social capital more quickly, and thereby you get better access to knowledge, better visibility, and higher chances to find acceptance of your propositions. So again, compounding the effects we were hearing before. And then on top of everything else, we have some moderators which make all these relations even stronger, in that case, more negative. First of all, it's very problematic if you believe in meritocracy. I mean, we all want to believe in meritocracy, but we also all know that it is often not attainable, particularly when we know the appraisals do not work. But the stronger you believe in it, the stronger you communicate it, the more all these effects will play out, and the higher you're producing societal inequality even. And the second aspect to take out is the winner-take-all structures. So if you have very loop-sided pay dispersion, for instance, the higher you are, the higher the prices, again, you compound societal inequality. So just to give you some ideas what your performance management practices might even create in society, not only inside your organization. But now let's turn to the last important consequences. This is the one where I have spent most of my research on. And this is what we often also link to performance appraisal rewards, and more precisely, high-powered incentives. If you do that, then you get this. And by the way, afterwards, please watch Dan Pink, and then you believe me, because he just shows this so much more nicely. Okay, so why do we use rewards? We think we have to use them to motivate employees, but we also know and remember that clearly, people are mainly motivated by their job, not by money, by purpose and by positive relationship. And in most cases, this would already be enough. But then, if we work with this type of incentives, what could be the problems we're creating? And just to remind you once more, it's about individual variable pay, which is linked to your past performance or to your goal attainment. Well, the biggest problem, I would claim, is that such incentives often create a misalignment, because we call this problem also multiple tasking, and it means just simply people will do what they're paid for, only. And I give you an example for that. In the US, high school teachers are getting a bonus for the grades of their graduation class. And one foreseeable consequence of that is that they mainly do teach to the test, something we might already not find so good, because we also want them maybe to make sure that people are critical thinkers or to shape character. But no, it's teach to the test now. But there are more severe problems with that, because people are clever. So what high school teachers tend to do is, in the class before the graduation class, they kick out all the pupils, which could be bad for the average grading later. So that's one thing. Gaming, but it can be even worse. They also do cheating. For instance, it is known that sometimes two high school teachers team up and one takes all the bad pupils of the other, so that in the end, the other gets a very high bonus, which they of course share. And more severe teaching fraud schemes were found, just recently published in the New York Times. So this, I think, is the most important and biggest problem with this type of rewards. And at least economists say you shouldn't use high-powered incentives for complex work. Keep that in mind, because sometimes psychology have a slightly different view, and that has a lot to do with the second point, and that is the effect of high-powered incentives on motivation. I think where we all agree is that high-powered incentives, of course, create extrinsic motivation. There's no doubt about that. We also call that price effect. But at the same time, they can undermine intrinsic motivation, which we call crowding out effect. And here we quibble, is that effect strong? Is it there? We have found it in our own research, but as I say, this is a big debate. Why should this be the case? Is because if you work with real, highly salient, big, fat rewards, then people tend to think about the money and not so much about the job any longer. And some economists have said, well, this is also a signaling effect. If you need to have a carrot on something, then it cannot be an interesting part of your job. So there are all kinds of explanations, and we also have data on that. But even if we leave that aside, let me go to the third point. Both these things already mean that the effect on individual performances, also not so clear-cut. So in the short term, this type of incentives should have a positive effect, and we can also show that on everything which is measurable, task performance. But many researchers have shown it has a negative effect on citizenship behaviors, it has a negative effect on helpfulness, on creativity and thinking outside the box. So especially creativity and thinking outside the box, this can be explained because this type of incentives make you more conservative, because you want to make sure that you get this type of reward. So again, we have a good logical explanations. We also find it in the data, and hence this then often leads to the case that full overall performance is reduced. And I find it quite interesting that Doshi and McGregor have found that even to be true in call centers, whereas we in our own research were able to show that this is also true for sales people. So we were having a field experiment where bonuses were taken away and salary was higher, and afterwards there was, over some years, better sales and higher customer performance, customer satisfaction. So do not think it's so easy to say, well, maybe we can use it for simple work. Even then, it's not so clear. And now with the last one, I am very clear, and now we also have first evidence of that. Very nice paper by a colleague of mine, Bart Koovers. They can also undermine organizational performance. And some of that you might have already guessed by now, because they create psychological costs such as stress, burnout, more sick days. Secondly, they may lead to unwanted fluctuation. People who come mainly for the money also go mainly for the money, which we also call mercenary effect. And these are costly to run and to maintain, because performance management becomes more complicated for complex tasks, as we already had. And then you always have compensation consultants in your house. And I'm not even talking about running the system every year, which also can be very costly. So overall, I would say leave high-powered incentives out of the picture. Don't use them. I don't really see the reason why we should use them for at least smart jobs. Now, let's go further and see what would be then maybe an alternative. And here I have it with then pink. Make sure that money is more a hygiene factor, pay enough, and then that's fine, that's good. And one thing you can also do is that you can change or switch to collective pay for performance. So that's not only the example of Svenska Handelsbanken, which I have put up here, but I can also show you a first new meta-analysis of that. And here, make no mistake, there is not enough research on most of it, but where I can say we have enough research, this is in the case of profit and gain sharing. It creates much more ownership, very energizing, highly motivating, and it seems to have almost no side effects. So here's clear do. What I find quite interesting, but I would say maybe do, because we need more research, and also you need to be a little bit careful with that one, is that you could also work with team pay for performance. But here you just have to be sure that you don't have unintended side effects, for instance, a stronger peer pressure, so you have to counteract that. And extremely interesting are these insights for top management team collective bonuses. So that would be really revolutionary for executive pay. And we have positive effects here, but clearly not enough studies. So please, finance researchers, do some more studies here. All right, where does this leave us? What are the key takeaways for traditional performance management? Well, first, it seems mainly to align to work to the rule, where it at the same time undermines adaptation needed out of the box thinking and mutual attunement. When it comes to motivation, it strengthens fear and extrinsic motivation, but not intrinsic motivation, health, and well-being. In fact, this is rather undermined. Development is very limited. It's more like pigeon training, behavioristic, not at all people really becoming knowledgeable and addressing also broader skills. When we look at individual performance, it does what it is intended for: short time boost, in task performance for simple work, but it fails for contextual, pro-social, and innovative performance. When we look at organizational performance, I am quite confident to say that it is hurting organizational performance, it is costly, ineffective, and often flawed. And with that, I end my talk, and I'm looking forward to